Hey folks, Jeff Salzman here, and welcome to the Daily Evolver. Today, my guest is Vince Horn, co-founder of Buddhist Geeks, the popular podcast, and teacher for the practice community Pragmatic Dharma. Here's my conversation with Vince. All right, man. So, hey, Vince.
Hey, great to see you.
Great to see you too. We just went on a technical odyssey, but here we are.
Yeah.
And it has been a while. We worked together at the Integral Institute with Ken Wilber and the gang back in 2006, something like that?
I was there from 04 to 06.
Yeah, and I was there from 04 to 07. So
there you go.
Yeah. So it was fun.
Yeah, it was a wild ride.
Yeah, so then you left and you went on to make quite a splash by co-founding and hosting the podcast Buddhist Geeks, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I was looking at that and I had no idea that you did, first of all, 400 podcasts, but that they were downloaded 10 million times.
At least, probably more than that now.
Yeah, probably, yeah. So that's cool.
Yeah.
So then you did the Buddhist Geeks conference for like 4 years and had 1,000 people attending those.
Yeah.
And now you're continuing with the Buddhist Geeks podcast.
Yes, after a little hiatus.
Yeah.
I did want to mention too that Buddhist Geeks really came out of working at Integral Institute for sure. And I was trying to figure out how to do a project where, at the time we were talking about big I, little I, integral. I was trying to figure out how to make integral real without using integral language. So that was the whole, impetus behind Buddhist Geek. So this whole last 12 years has been trying to live into the vision and the kind of intuition that I had working with you at Integral Institute. So,
that's good to hear. And me
taking
too.
that long.
Yeah, I know.
Taking that long to start to kind of even grasp a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that because my audience we're the integral geeks. So you could talk as integrally as you want.
Sure.
And I really appreciate, even as I'm listening to your stuff and reading it, the integral sensibility. It's just it's fragrant with it. So I love that part. And what I'd like to do is just talk about what you're up to now. And I read and watched some of your teachings, your videos, cool. and read your stuff on your website. And I got to say, man, I'm impressed. Yeah, I mean, you're a beautiful transmitter of the Dharma. And you've become kind of a new kind of teacher in the sense that you're doing it virtually. Yeah. And that is itself interesting to me because it's a new emergent of how we do community and how we do Sangha and all that good stuff. So I'll stop there and just let you tell us a little bit about what you're up to.
Thanks. Yeah. So, what I and we, because I've got a number of colleagues that I'm working with and partners, my wife, Emily, who I teach with, and my old co-host, Ryan Olkey, who's kind of coming back into the fold. So we have the podcast and that's kind of ongoing, 400 episodes and just keeps, stacking up. And then, teaching, trying to figure out how to teach, how to use the internet, how to avoid how to empower people and get people, support them in their kind of DIYing their path, but doing it interdependently, and really kind of sitting in my seat as a teacher, but then also recognizing that, there's all sorts of things I miss and don't understand and, constantly fucking up on.
Right.
On a daily basis. So just working with those paradoxes and trying to kind of gradually, try new things, see what works and keep iterating basically.
Yeah. You talk about the interpersonal interdependency of being a student and how you really need that peer group.
Yeah.
And it's hard. I mean, what I like about what you're doing, as I understand it, is Well, first of all, I love what you were talking about in one of your videos about how meditation ought to come with a warning label.
Yeah.
Because there are side effects and they're not always good.
Right.
And especially if you're on your own, if you're a freelancer like I was.
Yeah.
And I was self-taught, and I went to this teaching and that teaching, and I went to this retreat and I went to that retreat. And I just didn't stick with any one teacher. Shinzen Young for quite a while, but
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, where I was doing maybe 2 retreats a year with him. But I did get into trouble in the sense that I became, he always talked about mindfulness and equanimity. So mindfulness being just this ever more precise awareness of your experience, in ever finer detail. And in equanimity, allowing it to arise and do its thing and watch it and don't get attached, and second by second, moment by a moment. And I was really good with the first, as it turns out, but not so good with the second. And actually developed a anxiety disorder that I'm not blaming it on the meditation, but it certainly didn't help me. And I actually think that it was problematic because I would do my meditation and just become ever and ever more exquisitely aware of my dysfunction and pain.
Right.
And there it was. And, then it started with all kinds of hypochondria and so forth. And I realize now that, I was never going to be the guy who went off and got the orange robes and turned my life over. That just wasn't going to be me. I mean, there are people who do that. Terry Patton, went off with Adi-Dada, Tahiti and all of that. God bless him. And, came back with a lot of treasure. But that wasn't going to be me. But what would have helped, and I think saved me a lot of trouble, was if I had hooked up with what you're doing, actually. Pragmatic Dharma, right?
Yeah.
And so you have a group and it's virtual. And so how would that work?
Yeah. So this has been the most recent kind of iteration of our teaching online. And it's very simple in that there's 2 components. One is kind of a weekly group meeting that I facilitate. It's limited to 12 people. I've got 4 cohorts that I'm working with. So 50 people total in the training. And then we also meet privately one-on-one. That's the second component. And we essentially dynamically steer each month based on what people are interested in exploring. And so each month we kind of explore a theme. Last month we explored the 4 jhanas, the concentration, absorptions. The first month we explored noting meditation and social noting in particular. And then next month it looks like we're going to be exploring metta practice. And so, we're just kind of collectively steering the ship, and I'm sort of taking the lead in terms of actually pushing the rudders and, holding the group. And it's working extremely well because people get the relationship and community part, even though it's all online. And they get the feedback piece so they can improve the quality of their practice instead of just going the brute force method where, it's go retreat after retreat after retreat. And you just keep going until you hit the, this is my approach, hit the wall and pass out, or develop go into the deep, dark night pit of despair. And, and then eventually have to claw your way out of a nasty hole.
Well, it's, when we think about the evolution of practice and the evolution of these lineages and traditions, it feels like it's what's next in a way, because, we had to rethink this teacher-student relationship in these lineages because they worked in traditional societies in the amber altitude of development where, what people were doing were learning how to discipline themselves basically out of red, and so, these whole traditions formed around that.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that you can't really consciously and deliberately put yourself into that kind of a container. That can be really great as long as you know what you're doing.
Right.
But most people aren't going to do that. And so the whole idea of authority in terms of transmission and lineage has to be rethought.
I agree.
And I love what you wrote in one of your descriptions about how what you're trying to do, at least, is have a distributed system of authority.
Yeah.
And I know you're also doing real live retreats too, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, how's that work? Because in terms of the evolution of these things, I do think it's next.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. And I'm really curious, to see what it'll look like. I mean, I don't really know what it's. That's the edge. But I have some. I don't know.
Well, let me just pause and bring Rilke in, where he says, we want to love the question.
Yeah,
that's a love the question. We love our way into the answer. So you at least have the inquiry set up here.
Yeah. I think it's a great question. Well, I mean, I've seen what doesn't work. I've seen the attempt to decentralize authority doesn't work in a practice community very well. We did that we had a project called the Buddhist Geeks community, and we really just kind of we designed it so it was centrally designed, but we designed it to be decentralized. So we ended up having people just kind of go off into their own little kind of subgroups, peer-to-peer groups, and do their own thing. And very quickly, we had no clue what was going on in our own community, and we didn't really like our own community. So we shuttered that and, kind of realized that in order to figure out how to distribute authority, we needed to start with authority being centralized first, and then gradually figure out the appropriate ways to distribute the authority so that we didn't start from a swamp first.
Right.
And then hope that something emerged out of that was swampy.
It's hard to get out of the swamp. And that's, we often talk about it being the green swamp. It's where a lot of progressive spiritual seekers on the path find themselves, because we've sloughed off the submission to a teacher thing. I mean, we know we can't do that.
Thankfully.
But but we don't know what to do. And I mean, it's Green's problem in general with power and authority is there's so many allergies to it, appropriately, because, Green can see how power has been abused for millennia, and they're, working on deconstructing that. Fair enough. But then we seek a natural hierarchy. Mm-hmm. And I think you actually use that term in your writing, where, people offer what they have, and everybody gets to be, in a fluid kind of a situation. Everybody gets to be the genius in the way that they are, and other people get to recognize it. Now, that isn't an ideal, and I don't know exactly how we do that. I sometimes think that, from an integral perspective, when we think about integrating all of what has come before, this is actually an indigenous kind of a magenta situation where there aren't a lot of rules yet. We haven't really developed a lot of rules. We have customs, we have instincts, we have whatever. But basically, in any kind of a situation, we just look for the person who can handle it.
I also get the sense that part of the distribution of authority has to do with opening up some of the ways that meditation's been practiced, and particularly making it less of a solo endeavor and recognizing that actually it's an intersubjective process. And, I came up at the Insight Meditation Society and Spirit Rock, and they had a single model on retreat for a long time, where you come and it's always the same. There's this noble silence, and you sit and you walk and you sit and you walk. You have a teacher interview for 15 minutes. You hear a Dharma talk in the evening. You know what to expect. It's like going to McDonald's and getting, a Big Mac and fries.
Yeah. By the way, I came up in the same kind of container through Naropa and the Boulder Buddhist scene. So, stopping short of Vajrayana, it was basically you come and you do a mindfulness meditation.
Yeah. And it's highly systematized
Yep.
and kind of universalized and, almost like a franchise model in a way, or like a business that's really trying to like crank students through. And as I started teaching myself and working with people online, I realized like that was one of the big holes in that system, in that community, was really being able to kind of have a personal relationship with a teacher in a real way, not just saying like so-and-so is my teacher, but actually like, no, I can call this person up anytime and talk to them about my practice. And like, I can also maybe even hang out with them sometimes and see them interact, outside of this very specialized practice container context, like you would with a Vajrayana master or something like that.
Yeah.
And, because so much learning happens just from seeing how people embody their own understanding and the ways they fall short.
Now, do you make yourself available like that as a teacher to your students? I mean, do you see it as a teacher-student thing? Am I using the right terminology?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I sort of see my role as both teacher and facilitator, with like a kind of an asterisk between.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I do see that as the main role that I'm in when I teach, when I do that work. And yeah, I do. Well, for me, that kind of really close relationship develops naturally over time. It's like over years, it seems to become a natural thing. I've experienced that with some of my own mentors and teachers. And I've seen that with people that I've worked with for a number of years, that like as their practice deepens and as trust is earned on both sides, then it just naturally starts to become a more human relationship. And that's one way I think that meditation teachers or Dharma teachers are different than therapists, because with therapy, there's often, there's these very strong firewalls between, the therapeutic relationship and a human relationship. But for me, those firewalls are useful in the beginning, but then in a way they kind of have to dissolve to have the more profound and deeper kind of mysterious Dharma relationship, the human transmission type thing. I think somehow finding a way to bring that, to make space for that, is really important in this whole endeavor.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. To broaden that out, how do you see where we are as a culture in terms of, all right, I know that's a big question, isn't it? But even the cutting edge, even in terms of the, spiritual seekers, where do you see that edge being in a more general way?
Going back to integral theory, which I've really been circling back around to in the last few years, I see the cutting edge being mostly pluralistic, of really people starting to ask questions about, whose voices are missing in these scenes, and what have we been overlooking? Why have we been so focused on ourselves and our individual practices instead of society and social issues? So kind of moving out of that sort of individualist mindset, and grappling with, issues of race and gender and, all the different identities that are at play. I see the consensus of modern Buddhism has broken down quite a bit. There used to be a very strong kind of consensus view, and there weren't many voices outside of that. I mean, you had some traditionalists, old Zen masters still hanging around, doing their thing, which was usually to be avoided.
Yeah, it just a lot of times, most of the time, it didn't work. There was always a shadow side to it.
Major shadows. And so, it seems like what the cutting edge of the communities I'm part of, they're trying to kind of grapple with like why that happens and how to prevent it.
It's happening big time here with the Shambhala.
Oh yeah.
The Sakyong. And,
oh yes.
He's part of Naropa.
Yeah.
He's basically stepped back, and it's all because of abuse of women.
Yeah, and same with Noah Levine, who's in my tradition. He just had his authorization rescinded, by Jack and Spirit Rock, which is a really big deal because of something similar.
It's an oft-told story.
Yeah.
Yeah. The sex, money, the taking advantage of students when you have that absolute power kind of thing, when you've taken on your students' karma.
Yeah.
Baby, watch out.
Yeah. And I think too, when people start, like the feedback loops start getting wacky and they don't have feedback coming from outside of their own, communities anymore, like where they're not listening.
Mm-hmm. So I get it. So
it's the cutting edge.
So what do you think about the state of awakening? Maybe let me put it this way. What do you think Buddhist practitioners are actually doing? What's happening?
I think they're growing up in the same way that we're all growing up. And they're growing up through their traditions, which are usually not just one thing. I mean, most Buddhist practitioners I know are not just Buddhist practitioners. So they're engaged in a lot of different types of activities. And
you mean in terms of spiritual practices?
In terms of everything, but yes, spiritual practice and career and everything across the board. Again, and that goes back to the emergence of this pluralistic Dharma scene or postmodern Dharma. I'll flash this book because this just came out from Yale University Press, and Buddhist. This is by a scholar named Anne Glegg, and she's exploring really the emergence of postmodern Dharma.
You're holding up a book called American Dharma.
American Dharma, Buddhism Beyond Modernity. And
interesting.
Buddhist Geeks is one of the 6 case studies here. But there's also a number of others that she's exploring, like the East Bay Meditation Center in Oakland, who's really focused on people of color and practice in that domain. And she's focused on, the Vipassana scene and how it's changing and evolving, and Zen Roshi scandals, and, looking at it from a number of angles. And going back to the Wilber's idea of vertical and horizontal enlightenment, I still think that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of
so that's waking up and growing up.
Yeah,
waking up is the horizontal development. That's the state growth, and growing up is the vertical development through stages of development.
Yes, what I see is a kind of gradual shift on the on the growing up part. And I'm not sure about the waking up part. It's hard for me to know how that's changed. I do see a lot of people making really significant progress in their practice, in part because they have access to a lot more information. But then I'm hanging out in a very specific subculture of people that are really interested in making hardcore progress in their practice. And I don't see that as being, the focus that everyone has or every community has. And then again, what hardcore is and what awakening is also does seem to vary from tradition and community and teacher to teacher.
Right.
So there is that multi-dimensionality to awakening as well, which comes online with the pluralistic, perspective. Jack Kornfield talked about enlightenments, that there are these different vectors of awakening. So I think that's starting to become more appreciated. And as it is, that people are starting to have more integral looking practices where they are focusing on more of themselves or more dimensions, and not just their personal experience, but the social, embeddedness and relationality. So in that sense, it's like a really beautiful flourishing of wisdom.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's actually to be noticed and celebrated.
Yeah.
As messy and painful and confusing as it is.
Yes.
Yeah. But then we get to look at messiness and confusion and, why everything is unsatisfying, as Trumpa would say.
Yeah. And I feel like that's kind of where I notice a lot of the edges around this come in, because it's so easy to blame the teacher, or just to blame someone, like as if there's some bad actor who's just, like if they just got it, we'd have this all figured out and everyone would be nice to each other and we'd have kind communities. And
I
it's
know,
no, sorry.
No. And that's how I was going to say most people, certainly a whole lot of people, they think that the world is defective because it doesn't line up with their fantasy of how the world should be.
Sure.
Instead of looking at the world versus what it was, where we've come from,
right? History.
Where we are, where we're going, and to drop the fantasies and, become friendly to the reality of we are evolving beings in an evolving cosmos or something like that.
Yeah.
And we're getting somewhere. That's where, I think the Buddhists need to jump from the endless wheel of suffering, where it just keeps going round and round, to the endless spiral of suffering.
Yeah.
So that, we could see that we're still suffering, but we're getting somewhere. And that's, I think, a fourth turning in Buddhism, if you will.
Yeah.
So in this territory of really opening ourselves up to multiple streams of wisdom, and integralists are sort of, we can't help ourselves, so we want to do that. It's hard to stay in one tradition.
Yeah.
How about God? That's another thing that
I love God.
Oh boy, tell me about that.
I mean, I agree. It's one of the harder things. And I didn't grow up in a monotheistic family, so it's especially been hard for me. But I did grow up in the South, in the Southern Baptist country. Okay, so that makes it even harder. But I, hanging out in the integral scene, meeting Father Thomas Keating, and seeing him teach, it gave me a reference point for the fact that there are these tremendously profound Christian contemplatives, and that what they were talking about with God was different than the kind of the God that I had understood. And I could see that there was something totally profound and powerful there. And I still love, Wilber's Three Faces of Spirit teaching, and how it's like there's this sort of mystery that, sometimes we experience it as our own basic nature, and sometimes we experience it as the sort of mystery of life and the universe and God, and it's like teaching us, it's guiding us in some way.
There's a personal something there.
Yeah,
there's a loving intelligence that sees me back.
Yes.
That's that second person of God.
Yeah, and wants the best for me and us.
Yeah.
And is constantly trying to kind of get us on the path.
Yes.
And is okay when we fall off.
Yes. Well, just to round that out, I mean, so we have the first person, which is, a lot of the opening of awareness and turning subject into object and becoming bigger and more spacious and including more, and hallelujah around first person. Yeah. And then there's that second person, which is different. It's the being seen and loved and cared for, and I can talk to this thing, person.
Yeah.
And then and then the third person of God, which is the it, if you will, and it's the natural world. So it's nature mysticism. It's seeing the sky and the clouds and the animals and the world, this manifest reality, and to have a spiritual relationship with that.
Yeah.
And those three things together, even though they've been at war for centuries, literally, can be included in an integral spiritual practice.
Yeah, I like that.
So how about, angels? And, I just did an interview with Sean Esbjorn Hargens on his new exo studies, which is taking aliens seriously. It's my last podcast. And he's taking aliens seriously. And he's had experiences, and he has read all the books, and he's put it together, and he's created this Exo Studies Institute. And then, there's the Urantia. I did Brian Belitzo's interview, and there's, of course, all these seraphims and angels and this whole cosmology that's, I don't know. What do you think? I don't know what to think.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, my family religion was kind of alien stuff.
Oh,
So
really?
I had a sort of agnostic, new agey kind of family, and they were like really into aliens. So that was my, upbringing, which I had to like, that was the family religion I had to
Get rid of.
transcend.
Yeah.
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 So there's part of me that will always kind of, I think, be a little like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But there's another part of me. I've noticed this with, especially the people I know, and I've had experiences of this too, but especially the people I know, like my wife, who are really gifted at concentration. Like they can sit down, focus, and then they are like in all kinds of altered state consciousness. The body disappears, the universe disappears. They're like out there. Those people seem to very consistently have those kind of ways of understanding the universe.
Yeah.
And I think they're tapped into something.
Yeah. Well, we could even look at Vajrayana Buddhism. And we deal with all of the deities and we feed ourselves to them and we relate to them very, very deeply and very precisely in all kinds of ways. And, I would talk to these Vajrayana teachers and I would say, so that's all like happening in your own sort of consciousness, right? That's not really happening, right? They would never go, they wouldn't cop to that. We're actually accessing dimensions of intelligence and personality and God only knows what that are real in a way that we didn't realize.
Yeah. I mean, I think the position of saying like that's only happening in your consciousness is itself a kind of dualistic, and particularly the dualism of mind body. Or self world, like that those things are somehow disconnected and you're just over here having your own hallucination.
Right.
But it's like, but when a lot of people have the same kinds of hallucinations, then it's like, it's not really a hallucination anymore.
Right.
It's a shared reality.
Right. And at any rate, you're changed by them.
Yeah. I mean,
so call it what you will. The effects are real.
Yeah.
And so that leads me to then, I know another area of interest for you, and that's psychedelics, because we're talking about, some of the same territory here.
It's
just sort of the express route.
Yeah. Has that been part of your path?
It has, absolutely. Not for years. And I never did a whole lot of psychedelics, but I did love me my mushrooms. Probably a dozen times.
Yeah.
And I am so grateful for what I saw on mushrooms, because you can't unsee it.
Right. Yeah.
And that has informed. So, I saw a territory that I was able to then find my way to in other ways. But, I'm not sure I would have without him.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear that. I spoke to Roland Griffiths, who's the lead researcher at Johns Hopkins doing their psilocybin research stuff. And he's a longtime Vipassana practitioner. And he did a whole, I'm sure you're aware of this, but he did a whole study working with longtime meditators who hadn't done psychedelics, but they'd done decades of practice. And they came in, did psychedelics, and it was hugely beneficial, like across the board. It ended up being some of the most significant experiences that most of them had. And that was like after, decades of Zen sessions and retreats and, profound contemplative experiences. And that's kind of how I got into the whole psychedelic mess too, is I was a straight edge, meditator for a long time. And then kind of wanted to see like, well, what is this about? And, the people, especially as a teacher, so many students come in through that doorway and I had no clue, what it is that they were experiencing. So I just wanted to kind of see. And for me, doing psilocybin the first time, it was like very clearly the same kind of ego dissolution process. And I could kind of track it in the same way I track my practice. And, but at the same time, it was fast and furious.
Oh,
and physically, the visual phenomena was different for me, and it kind of was very interesting, and the sense of being connected to the earth and to my ancestors in a way that I hadn't experienced doing Buddhist practice. And then also having losing my shit one time doing psilocybin. The fourth time I did it, it was like a big dose, and I was stressed, and it was really, in retrospect, like a immature move. And I lost touch with consensual reality on and off for a few days in a way that was really scary. And I ended up learning a lot from that experience, but it also showed me how dangerous it can be to do these substances.
That's what's so encouraging to me, is to see these drugs that we baby boomers thought were just fun. And they weren't always fun. I had my share of bad trips too, or certainly portions of trips that were bad. That to take these seriously as entheogens, right? The medicine that brings you God. To take them seriously as means of insight and practice, and to have, some lower right build up around that, some structures build up around that, is, I think, tremendous progress in terms of human spiritual development.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited about the future of psychedelic Dharma, and there's a whole generation of people coming up who are actively figuring out how to hybridize those practices and those domains in a way that I think will be really interesting. When it's more okay to come out of the proverbial closet.
Right. Yeah. And it's becoming more and more okay. I mean,
it is.
Yeah, and then there's just the sort of march of progress. It's so quaint to put it that way, but the just natural development of consciousness. I just came back from a workout with my trainer, who is not particularly trained in any of this stuff, but he has this meditation app on his phone. Yes, that has been tremendously helpful to him in terms of managing issues and so forth. And also, he tells me about how he parents his little 4-year-old daughter with her emotions and how things will pass, and she's aware of how things come and go now, and she reminds him that things come and go when she sees him, and it's like, what is going on here? It's it's a whole new ball game. Consciousness just continues to race, basically, across the board. The
mindfulness movement is really, in a lot of ways, it's been a big part of that. And
So what's next then for Vince and the Buddhist Geeks, and what are you excited about?
Well, one thing I've been excited about is coming up with new financial models for how to teach deep Dharma. And in this Pragmatic Dharma training, I think I finally hit on something after a lot of years of trying different things. Which is, it's very simple, but it's kind of going back to the roots of generosity in the tradition. And I was teaching up until recently, through a for-profit enterprise, meditate.io. And I just found at a certain point, I couldn't do it anymore. There was something that wasn't working for me in my heart, and kind of went
by charging a particular,
doing a pay for service model. It really started to hit me as some of the longer term students that I'd had started doing these incredibly generous things to support, me and my family during difficult times. I just realized how much that was lacking in the models and structures I was using, and how different it was to, say, teach a retreat and do it in the sort of generosity based model, the quote unquote Dana model, and that I just found worked so much better than a pay for service model.
How does it work?
Well, you know, the way it works is when people come on retreat, at the very end of the retreat, they're invited to give to support the teachers, and the teachers don't make money from the registration fees for the retreat. So it makes the cost of the retreat lower, and thus lowers the bar of accessibility. People can more easily attend. And then what we found was we ended up, as teachers, we actually ended up bringing home twice as much money than we did when we set our own price. And we felt more connected to people and more in like human relationship with others. So it was just like across the board, there wasn't a single thing I could find that was better in the pay for service model for what we were doing. And so I've been trying to figure out, but that said, it didn't translate to the digital world so well. And to like leading online classes and, you know, and doing like programs online. So that's what I've been trying to figure out is, you know, how to bring that spirit of generosity to digital types of learning situations. And I was really inspired by the whole recommended donation thing that happens in a lot of communities where it's kind of like a compromise between the sort of pure generosity model of like, do whatever you want, which sometimes works out really well if it's the right situation, and sometimes means you make nothing as a teacher.
Right.
And I've seen both. And so, you know, what I did with this program was to say, listen, this program, this training it's not pay for service, it's donation based, but I'm going to tell you what the suggested donation is. You know, and this is what I think I need to make for this to work. I'm going to tell you the average that people in the training are actually giving right now. This is the average. And I'm going to tell you the range. You know, this is the bottom end and the top end of what people are giving. And then I'm going to ask you to look at, you know, if you live outside of the US, what's the exchange rate like compared to the dollar? Because the dollar is really high right now. And, you know, what feels like too much, what feels like too little, you know, kind of questions that are related, like they're contemplative questions of like, how do I relate to money and to generosity and to things that I value? And how do I engage with that? And what I've been really surprised to find doing this is that I'm making more than enough to live. I'm close to the goal that I had in terms of my hourly rate. And it's sustainable and it works. And I want to figure out how to replicate that kind of model, but not do it so that I'm trying to work with like a bazillion students, but replicate it more like cells replicate, you know, where it's kind of, there's a horizontal growth that can happen and not just to kind of scale it up to infinity and beyond,
right.
You know, kind of hyper-capitalist sort of model.
Right. Tony Robbins.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Headspace, you know, the app.
Yeah. Well, I mean, good on you, man. And Godspeed figuring that out, because I think that too is next. You know, we have to actually, you know, we talked about liberating power in redistributing and just rethinking power lineages and transmission and all of that.
Yeah.
And this too needs that. The whole financial piece.
Economics.
Yeah. Because people, you know, there's just so much bad karma that still has to be burned in a way around that. People have resentment about paying for spiritual teachings. They have confusion around that. Yet teachers need to live. They have families. That, you know, it's a whole thing.
Yeah, and I've been really enjoying reading a book called The Structure of World History by this philosopher named Kojin Karatani. He's a Japanese philosopher, and he's sort of very interestingly looking at kind of reinterpreting Marxist theory, you know, which looked at everything as like who controls the modes of production controls everything, and he sort of reframed that as there are modes of exchange. You know, and there's throughout our history, we have these different modes of exchange. You know, we have this reciprocal gift giving that arose, you know, in the sort of archaic, you know, and magical cultures. And then, you know, and then with you said the blue or amber meme, you had, you know, this sort of like protect and, you know, kind of defer, and send all your resources to this person, and they'll kind of take care of you. I forget what the name he uses for that. And then, in the Greek, the orange meme and the Western industrial revolution, that the mode of exchange became the capital nation state. You had this kind of coming together of these three pieces, and, able to have this sort of impersonal capital exchange that was regulated by the nation, and the state represented the sort of the culture and the values of the nation and the people within it. And what he posits is that there is a fourth mode of exchange that is a return back to, at a higher level, the reciprocal gift giving, and nomadicism. And you can see the whole emergence of the digital nomad culture, and it's like it feels like we're kind of at the edge of trying to figure out what new forms of economic activity could be there. And one of the very most interesting things in this book is he cites a few examples of where he thinks this has emerged very, very briefly in history, because he also says these aren't things that are just developmental. They've all coexisted all the time. Like capitalists were existing well before capitalism became the dominant mode, and there's still reciprocal gift giving in families, even though we have a very strongly capitalist society. And so what he pointed out is that in the early Christian and Buddhist communities, they represented the emergence of this new mode of exchange in a very kind of brief and a small way. And so I found that amazing, because it was like, oh yeah, like my tradition has this. Like I can actually go back and retrieve and move forward and evolve. Yeah. That's something I'm really curious about.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And it just, reminds me that something I've been seeing over and over, and that is what's next is consists of some part of going back and bringing particularly that magenta, archaic, so it's what you're talking about. It's also deep community.
Yes.
How do we get deep community now?
Yeah.
How the fuck do we get deep community now?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I want to love my way into the answer. I want to love that question.
Yeah.
And the other one is just the re-enchantment of the world in general.
Yeah. The magic of the world.
Yeah. So we can look around and feel like we're supposed to be here, and so is everything else. And here we are, and it's a miracle,
Yeah, and we're not just like an evolutionary mistake that's like just ruining our planet, and just although that's also true.
That's also true. But we can look, even as you were talking about, going back and looking at these stages of the development of how economic systems evolved. You can see that, some of them are stupid and brutal, and they have all kinds of downsides, but they were the next thing.
Yeah.
That's what took humanity to the next thing and the next thing. And that we could be friendly as integralists to that process without becoming, ignorant of its downsides, including, the current downsides.
Yeah.
So anything else, anything we missed, anything else you want to put on the table here?
No, just that, I've been really, grateful to come back around to the whole integral vision. And, I think in my own personal journey, I had to deconstruct my way out of a relationship to integral that wasn't integral at all. Like I was a young, when I worked with you and worked for you, I was a young punk, and I was trying to make sense of the whole integral thing in terms of like a grand theory.
Right.
And that was a big realization to like go into the deep source code of integral and discover like Robert Keegan and, start doing his immunity to change process and see, oh, in fact, I have all these assumptions that haven't been tested, and, to deconstruct my way out of that process. And then somehow come back around, has been a really surprising. And it's also been really fueled by Trump. As a catalyst. Like, I don't want to be trying to tear the thing down from up here that he's tearing down from below, because if we tear it down too quickly and we don't have something to replace it, we're fucked.
Right.
So I guess I just want to say, like, it's really vitally important that people move through the pluralistic stage of development so that we can start to imagine and get in touch with new forms of community and practice that will give us, the strength and the insight and the conviction necessary to let the old world die and to to create something new together that actually, or at the very minimum, we can survive. But more than that, to thrive.
Yeah, beautifully put.
Yeah,
I concur 110%. Yeah, no, that's the project we're working on here. So
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Vince, for your wonderful work. It's so fun to see how you've blossomed since the Integral Institute days. And I did not see you as a punk. I saw you as somebody who actually got something done. It was great.
Thank you.
So, all right. Well, thanks, Vince Horn.
Thank you, Jeff.
And thanks, everybody, for listening to the Daily Evolver. See you next time. This is Jeff Salzman signing off.